contacted by Adam Marl, Commissioner Marl, and he's got a conflict today, so he won't be able to make it. So let's get started. I'm looking at the agenda here. Where was it? First thing issue is JPAC updates. Uh, do you, I don't know that, at least it said reporting by the JPAC members here, so I think I'm the only one here on JPAC. Is that correct?
I'm an
So,
alternate, but
yeah.
it's all yours, my friend.
Yeah, I don't really have much to update going forward. Our meeting's tomorrow morning, and we got a brief presentation of a snapshot of what that looks like this morning with regard to climate grants and so forth. So I don't have anything to add. So I guess we can jump right into the next agenda item, which is Special Committee on Transportation Planning. And Trent, you want to take it away?
Yes, happy to do that. And I can add one thing to the JPACT update conversation, which is that tomorrow at JPACT, there will be a conversation about the 2025 legislative session, and specifically around the transportation package that is being anticipated. And so it is me and several of my colleagues from throughout the region who will sort of be introducing sort of the road ahead and the conversations to get from here to 2025 and what is JPAC's role. And so that will be heavily focused on, what we're anticipating is it will be heavily focused on the same conversations y'all been having here. What is the role of tolling? What is its value? What are the needs? But more broadly, like what are the roles of like all the transportation funding needs? And so that's going to be our recommendation to JPACT tomorrow, is that like there's a lot of steps between now and 2025, but focusing on the money and the transportation funding in general seems to be where there's a lot of momentum versus focusing on projects more specifically. Most transportation packages, as y'all know, are like have a big satellite project or a big anchor project that says we all shook hands and we passed this and there's going to be a big groundbreaking or two or three projects like that. I think where the momentum is right now is just how to resolve the funding cliff that we're all facing together. Specifically, ODOT's funding cliff is what's on the legislature's mind. And so trying to have some conversations between now and then to also remind them about the local needs, regional needs. It's more than just ODOT. So I wanted to say that that's a conversation that's starting tomorrow, and JPACT will have a conversation about how they want to work together moving forward and what they want to work together on.
Well, hopefully appreciate that, Trent. I'm just hoping, and I know Brett, you've heard this before at the meetings. There's not been much success in trying to get at the JPAC table regional acknowledgement that we ought to be striving for a regionally balanced transportation system. And that when I look at where we stand in comparison to others, and when I look at what grants get awarded, not awarded, we really need a tremendous investment in Clackamas County to bring us even close to where the other counties are. So I'm hoping that is something that everyone's mindful of. I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think there's some other voices that ought to be factored into that JPAC doesn't represent, which is the rural areas, surrounding areas that are not within JPAC's reach. But the largest concern I have, it's not I won't say it's a no-brainer, but it's relatively obvious. So we learned out of this tolling thing is we have legislators who don't know the ins and outs or the issues that we face here, at least on the 205 tolling project, for example. They were completely unaware of the diversion, completely unaware of the rural nature of our roads, completely unaware we had no transit. And it just worries me that I guess more or less really an assignment for a lot of weight on your shoulders, Trent, at least on behalf of the county, not necessarily JPAC in this regard, and the cities here as well. They have their lobbyists as well, that we're going to have to do an extra lift to bring them up to speed on this, because I certainly don't want one agency alone to shape what that package looks like on our behalf.
Yeah, I think that is the point of the conversation tomorrow, and all my colleagues and I think agree on that sentiment. Like maybe not the transportation system, but like how it's funded, and that's kind of giving a little bit more autonomy to all of our agencies to be able to work together and have some of those regional pieces. And so that will probably be our recommendation. I mean, on the slide that I will have tomorrow, the phrase money keeps us together and projects pull us apart is this like on my slide. And so that is the whole point, is like, let's not focus on the projects, let's focus on like how we fund this moving forward. Mayor Milch.
Well, I'm just assuming it goes without saying that part of this discussion will be whether some form of revenue sharing it will continue to exist. No matter what changes we make in funding sources, we want to see local projects. I know you want to downplay that, but local funding in addition to state funding. So I'm assuming that'll be part of your agenda as well.
Yeah, revenue sharing is a really big deal for a lot of us. It is true for this tolling conversation, but just more broadly, that's how the transportation system is funded. Yeah, we all want to make sure that no funding solution is independent to like a specific agency, right? Continue thinking about the funding stream as a system where it makes sense. Okay. So thanks for that. Sorry to yo-yo back to the last topic and then come back to this one. Special subcommittee on transportation planning. Excellent turnout, everybody, at the various meetings that have been happening throughout the region. In addition to the January 6th meeting, which had, I don't know, 150 to 200 people in it, give or take. I think on the higher side of that, they pushed the testimony in past the time. It was, I think, as good a turnout as you would want or expect. A lot of good and thoughtful comments to the legislators who were in the room. And my personal feeling is that in their meeting on the 10th, you were starting to see them start to repeat some of those comments that were being shared by community members. And so that subcommittee did meet again just the following Wednesday, so last Wednesday, the 10th. For their next meeting, they did two things. They had a deep dive on how commuter patterns and congestion patterns specifically, and how they sort of philosophically map those things out. Very interesting about travel demand per lane. If you want to go back and listen to that, very high level though, at like a theoretical level, not specific to any part of the system within Oregon. In addition to that, there was another sort of open comment period at the end of that meeting specific to those folks who wanted to testify outside of the metro area, knowing, I think, that the toll program will have impacts beyond the metro area, but also the tolling plan moving forward there's a statewide tolling plan, and so what they implement up here will sort of set the precedent and stage for future toll projects, no matter where they are in Oregon. So I think it was good for them to open that up. There was only one person who testified. They were from grocers union, I believe, and so they represented membership for grocers, and they were very clear that they were concerned about their membership throughout the state needing more than just transit, and whether if there is reliability on transit, that not everybody has access to it, that it doesn't have full coverage of where their employees come from. It was interesting testimony. I hadn't heard something quite like that from another person who's testified just yet. So that is the current status of that group. They will now switch towards what I think will be no more testimony and move towards the rest of their, they had assigned themselves 10 meetings that would happen towards the end of February, early March. So I anticipate that they will use those times during the short session. They will have a regular schedule in there, and we'll meet at whatever those times are going to be, and go through what they have always called their deep dives into certain topics. So a good preview to what those deep dives are going to be was what we just saw on the 10th from its WSP, who is ODOT's consultant contractor to move through the tolling projects. And again, they share that super high level theoretical conversation around like what demand looks like and how you can up it or lower it by where you put incentives or disincentives to be on the facility. What was interesting at the end of that conversation though was several comments by Senator Finley, who basically said like, look, we asked for a deep dive, and I think he said something to the effects either in that meeting or to me afterwards, but the phrase in my mind that he said was, if I was wearing flip-flops, my toes wouldn't be wet. And so we're not deep enough is what he was trying to say. And I really appreciated that comment. He's not from the region, but he was saying like, you know, we have a job to do, and this theoretical conversation is good. Let's get into specifics and let's talk about our projects that we need to talk about. And so I think that there's really a little pressure on ODOT to go and do more. And then other comments by those legislators at that January 10th meeting, many of them were reflecting the sentiments that I think were prominent at that Gladstone hearing. And so even from some of the legislators who had been quiet or relatively quiet up to that point. So I would say overall great turnover from where I think a lot of people thought the subcommittee was going and where they were to where they clearly see that they need to do some work. And I think that is reflective of y'all showing up. You're unmuted, Commissioner.
Well, good to hear. Councilor Sherman, see you're up.
Yeah, I did dial into that last meeting on the 10th, and I will agree with Trent. You know, the level of detail they provided when the topic is supposed to be analyzing driver behavior really didn't get into driver behavior at all. Really didn't touch on any actual outcomes of what happens when certain things occur. They kind of talked theoretically about the things you need to be aware of and what occurs, but there was no, what it kind of felt like to me was there was no meat that could be used for an action step or to create any policy from. It was just kind of this stuff. Here's what kind of happens when these things occur, but nothing that a committee like this could take and say, okay, well, based on that, based on the diversion that occurs when people slow down, here's what we need to be aware of. There's zero of that. And so, I mean, it was an interesting meeting, but it left, I kind of felt at the end, like, I can't say that it was on purpose, but it was at such a high level that it really didn't feel like useful information being provided to the committee. But that's just my 2 cents worth on that. Thank you.
Yeah, where they did get into details in that committee were some of the same things that ODOT has already shared and talked about with you, which I think was actually reflective of the good work you've been doing and how we've been able to get a lot of information from ODOT. But it also kind of shows me they really haven't come too far away from where they've been in a while, which is they were using the floating bridge in Seattle and the Seattle 405 project as examples of like how congestion management works and works well. And committee members were pretty quick to say that that's not comparable. And y'all have said the same thing to them as well. And so 405 is always a particular curiosity to me as an example of like how to do demand and regional, because there are free lanes and then there are tolled lanes. And then they are also not open on the weekends or at night. And so many of the same things that y'all have been talking about, it's a much bigger system, to be fair. But, you know, apples and oranges in many ways. But the legislators were quick to pick up on some of those pieces really, really fast. And so I think well represented on the concerns that y'all have shared. I think y'all have planted, I think, good seeds to push those legislators towards action. I will say an outcome of some of this is that Representative Hartman has put in several requests for this subcommittee to do more. One of them is, you know, leveraging whether or not the subcommittee should request or require an audit of ODOT and their financing. I don't know what will come of that, but I think that was heard at the Gladstone meeting. She sort of verbally announced that, and then also had a little press release shortly after that intimated some of those things too. I do, if it's okay with you, I'd like to. I'm sorry.
Don't you have your hand up?
Yeah,
Oh,
I would echo, yes.
Mayor, I think you froze. There's been some internet compromises due to the storm here. So there he goes. We lost you for a bit there, Mayor. So can you start over?
So that
We lost you again.
I watched the meeting on the 10th, and I agree with what Trent said. You hear me?
You're breaking up, so you're in and out.
You may want to turn off your video for a moment just to preserve
Okay,
the bandwidth.
I'll do that.
That way we can hear you.
Okay. The thing I noticed was, first of all, what Trent said, that definitely the comments coming from the leaders was said on the 6th, and we're reacting to it and asking questions based on that. Was very positive. It surprised me a little bit. Guy at WSP at one point sort of acknowledged adding the third lane on the stretch from Stafford Road 213 was an express lane toll, where you would pay just to use one of the lanes. And when they had talked about just not doing this project at all, we didn't know whether it would ever come to pass. And now to hear it spoken of in the context of an express lane approach, I think we'd rather see no tolling at all, but at least they seem to be open to that kind of approach, which has been more effective in this part of the country than tolling all lanes. So I don't know if he's authorized to really acknowledge that as potential future policy, but I was glad to hear it mentioned in the meeting.
Well, that's good to hear, Mayor. I appreciate that. I will say that the RTAC members had requested that they study that again, or study that in more detail than they had before. And we made some request thereafter to when they do evaluate it just like you said, from Stafford to 213, and thereby we would not have issues, or far less issues, with diversion than we currently have. However, the study that they are doing, just for fair warning here, they're doing the study between the Abernathy Bridge, which is a little bit different, and the Stafford exit, but also in recognition that of the point toll at the Abernathy Bridge. So instead of being a seamless pricing affair from, again, 213 to Stafford, they would have, you'd at the point toll, let's say you're going southbound towards I-5 at rush hour, you would pay the point toll at the Abernathy Bridge. That might discourage you to get off the freeway right away anyhow, because you don't want to pay the toll. And then you may or may not be able to enjoy the potential and the count for those people who might want to take the express lane. So I think the express lane, as has been done in a lot of areas, starts with one area and kind of grow, not always, but kind of grows. And it's there to help augment the cost of that additional third lane. But that free lane model, glad to hear it was discussed. I guess I'll need to go back and watch that January 10th meeting, which I haven't done yet. But thank you for sharing.
Because I'm double booked, I'm going to just maybe ask for your patience a little bit. The last topic on your agenda is the legislative update. And this really is the legislative tolling topic, since you're the toll strategy subcommittee. For the upcoming session is what will this subcommittee ultimately recommend. And so we'll be in touch more on that, but beyond what we've talked about so far, there really isn't more to share on that specific topic, and also the conversation of how to get to 2025. We're waiting for sort of framework from Senator or Representative McLean on how she is hoping to sort of lead the state through this early conversation. And once we know that, we'll be able to share it. Probably we'll be able to share it at the February C4 meeting at large. And we can probably talk more about it then. And we'll also have had this conversation with JPAC to know more there too. It also says on your agenda there was a legislative breakfast this morning, but there wasn't because of the ice. And so no real update there. But I'm just quickly adding that to say that there's really not really a need to have that conversation on the legislative update part of your agenda.
Great. And on that note, I have a hard stop at 1, so we might get done early anyhow, but if we do, then maybe your Councilor Sherman, you can take over if need be. But does that complete your presentation, Trent?
Yes, all done on my side.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda is our prep for the OTC meeting. I guess Jamie's going to present here.
Yep, she should be jumping on now. There we go.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Yes, just hopping on to share. I do not have an agenda yet for the OTC meeting, but I do have a couple things to share on upcoming toll meetings, including the OTC meeting. So if you don't mind, I'll share my screen with a new tool that was provided to us by ODOT. So can you see my screen here? I may need to zoom in a bit.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
You see it? Okay, great. Thank
Maybe
you.
zoom in if you can a bit.
Yes. Let's see what's going on here. In a different program. Always fun. Maybe that. No, that's a search. Sorry, guys, bear with me.
I think Jamie says at that top banner. Yeah. You
This?
see that to the left a little bit next to normal text. At that 100%. Just to the left. There we go. I think if you can.
So good, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So I just want to share this tool that has been provided to us. This came out of the RTAC staff group. Many of us said there's so many meetings going on, and we've been talking about this here for a long time as well. It's like, how do we know what is going on where and what they're talking about? And this is broadly, not just when they're talking about technical issues, but also when they're talking about legislative issues. So this is a new tool that they're going to keep updating for us, and I'm happy to provide to you all, which shows the meetings. Some of these have passed, as you know, and some of them are showing upcoming meetings. So I just wanted to share this with you all. We can send it out afterwards as well. Obviously, we've already gotten through the special subcommittee on transportation planning, which we were just talking about. Commissioner Savas noted the RTAC meeting, or the Regional Toll Advisory Committee, will be meeting on the 22nd. That's this coming Monday. That meeting will have some updates from the Director Strickler, on the implementation plan, the I-205 toll project financial scenarios, and then what they're calling the adaptive traffic management framework, which is a different way of saying the monitoring plan. So those are all going to be updates from the Director. And then the bulk of the meeting will be spent talking about the work plan for 24 for RTAC, as well as an introduction to toll revenue allocation, which we have learned will be a broad conversation led by Councilor Christine Lewis and John Isaacs from the Portland Business Alliance about what revenue sharing might look like to the group. So there's an hour, I believe, on the agenda for that conversation. Could be very interesting. So just noting that's the agenda for the RTAC meeting. Then, oddly, this is misplaced, and I'll circle back to this, but I'll note on the 24th, which is 2 days after that, the Oregon Transportation Commission will meet. The agenda here says TBD, but we have learned that there will be 2 substantive conversations around tolling. First will be a presentation by Travis Brower on the 205 revenue scenarios, and action by the OTC on which of those revenue scenarios should be continued to be reviewed for the next level of revenue analysis, essentially. So that will be direction there. And then the other big conversation that impacts tolling will be kind of some ground setting for them on revenue allocation, similar to the RTAC conversation. But I do believe it will be more about how toll revenue can be spent based on the federal and state laws. And then a conversation coming forward from Councilor Lewis and John Isaacs, representing whatever discussion happens at RTAC on revenue sharing. So I just want to make sure everyone knew that was happening. There, as always with the OTC meetings, there is an opportunity for folks to testify and bring forward perspective. We've had a lot of conversations about the 205 revenue scenarios. So if you have strong opinions, this is an opportunity to bring those forward to the OTC in writing or verbally. We did hear, Commissioner Savas and I had a bunch of meetings last week following up on some of this. We did hear that Travis Brower will be bringing forward a recommendation to remove one of the scenarios, the scenario that showed the highest toll rate and the highest impact, essentially trying to accomplish congestion management on a larger section of the road. He's going to be recommending, or at least we're hearing from staff, that that be withdrawn from consideration, and that they tweak one of the other scenarios to reflect no tolling from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. So change one of the scenarios to show not 24/7 tolling. So that is what we know about the conversation that's coming up, and that OTC will give some direction back. So wanted to share that with you all. And then just quickly back to this handy dandy little sheet, wanted to let you know a lot of other meetings are happening as well. The RMPP technical work group has fired back up again. We had a meeting yesterday. Many of the staff and staff from your agencies attended to hear about the next steps in the process for developing the EA scenarios for RMPP. And then we also had an office hours on Tuesday, which was about the I-205 EA, the supplemental EA and the technical process that's going to be moving forward. We have another office hours on this Thursday, tomorrow, to hear more about that and understand the timeline of process and how we can engage. That's really focused on modeling methodology, so it's pretty wonky. I won't go into it, but many of your staff are also attending that meeting. Attended Tuesday and will be likely attending on Thursday. So that was a lot all at once from me, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. And as I said, we can provide this to you, and then also as we move forward and get this updated, we'll make sure it gets out to you all so you can have this tool to reference as well.
Any questions for Jamie? Getting off easy, Jamie.
Commissioner, I see that Councillor Lewis has joined us, and I know she loves it when we put her on the spot, but we perhaps this is an opportunity to hear a little bit more, if you know it, Councillor, about the plan to bring forward the revenue sharing conversation at RTAC and then to the OTC. We're hearing bits and pieces, but I know you're intimately involved, so would appreciate any insight you have about that.
Sure. So the RTAC, we've obviously been asking, and I in the agenda setting meetings now for, I think, 3 different meetings for revenue sharing to be an item of discussion. They have consented, so it is the bulk of the meeting on Monday. They have asked that it is a table discussion. I do believe ODOT will be giving a small presentation. I have not seen it. I've been told it will be short. But then they are not facilitating. They are taking themselves out and letting the table discuss. John Isaacs of Portland Metropolitan Chamber and I were asked to co-facilitate. I don't know if that means they're not flying in our consultant, but I think on this one it's table conversation, so we're not going to be using a consultant for that portion of the meeting at least. Then we've been asked, John and I, to document all of the things that we hear and bring them forward to the OTC the following Wednesday. So ODOT is not translating or doing what ODOT sometimes does, which is conveniently selecting what they like to hear. And instead, it's 2 of us from the table going to represent how the discussion goes and all of the voices that are at the table.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Lewis, for that. You know, you and I spoke last week, and I really appreciate, you know, all your hard work, and I know you understand quite a bit of the predicament that a lot of the local jurisdictions are under, those in particular that own and operate transportation facilities. You know, for cities and counties, that boils down to roads and intersections and all the stuff, then especially along this corridor, the safety impacts and the liabilities that go with that beyond the wear and tear. So I'm hoping that local jurisdictions, whether they're there or submit something, or they're not there and submit something, like let's say Gladstone does not have a seat at the RTAC table, that Gladstone, other cities that are not represented directly, are you know, maybe look at sending in their comments or maybe speaking and under the public comment period. But to me, this is something that is very, very concerning for those who live and die on the 50-30-20 split. And hopefully there's ample representation from the members around the table, which that puts a burden on Mayor Bubenik, Mayor Boliastowski, myself, Commissioner Fye from Washington County, and the representative from Multnomah County, City of Portland, and others. So that's I'm hoping we can again make that case for how those revenues are going forward are going to be split, and be split in a way that reflects not just maybe tolling, but other funding mechanisms as well that might come along the way. But appreciate your leadership in that regard. Questions for Counselor Lewis? Anyone? We'll look forward to that. Jamie, anything else you might suggest?
Oh, sorry. You know what? I kicked her over too soon. Let me bring her back right back.
Okay.
Sorry about that. The wrong button too soon.
I thought she froze there. She's in the transporter room.
Sorry about that, Jamie.
That's okay. I missed it. Was there a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there anything else you wanted to add or bring up for your presentation, or are you finished?
I guess just in closing, I would say on the revenue sharing piece, the conversation for RTAC, Commissioner Savas, so you know I'm working to get an RTAC prep meeting scheduled for our team, hopefully this Friday. So Councilor Lewis, I'll be reaching out to you to see if you might be able to join us for that conversation. And then any advice, Councilor Lewis, you have for us to be coordinated in this conversation, would love to hear from you. I think an hour to talk about revenue sharing could be very interesting on the RTAC agenda, knowing that people have a lot of different ideas. So if you have any framework or suggestions for us to be able to kind of get out to folks, would love to hear that from you, either here or offline. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing, it to me is somewhat obvious. I've heard for quite a long time from different folks from ODOT saying that, from time to time, varying ways of kind of messaging that there's not enough money left over in the current tolling schemes to fund for local projects or for local share or revenue sharing. So therefore, if there is a request or there is some kind of effort to provide local share and that results in a higher toll rate in order to provide that funding, the consequence could be even more diversion or more issues about diversion. So it's a balancing act. I just don't know what the real numbers are. I'm certainly not going to project I know what the numbers are. Admittedly, ODOT's using these numbers as testing for their modeling. I recognize that they're not firm, but it does give me a little bit of pause when it's even the $2.25 rate that they've been using around, and to hear staff say there's nothing left over for sharing. Maybe that changes. We'll see how it's presented at RTAC by ODOT staff on Monday. I'm looking forward to that and see what's possible. Anything else? Oh, Councilor Sherman.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, a lot of the conversation has revolved around, ODOT kind of saying that mitigation issues, things like that, are going to be pushed to the local level, and it's the localities who are going to have to cover the expense of a lot of these things. And at the same time saying that, that revenue stream, there's still no solid notion as to any type of revenue sharing structure in place. I mean, it seems kind of it's a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario. How do we kind of start with the premise of the 50-30-20 split just because that's what it was before, without really knowing does that cover what would be kind of future responsibilities. But then we really can't even come to the table with what makes sense from a revenue sharing perspective because we don't know what the revenue is going to look like, nor do we know what our responsibilities are going to be. So how do we craft this message? How do we move this conversation to a level of knowledge so we can actually make decisions based on some type of factual information? Or do we just keep kind of pushing at whatever numbers we have in front of us and just get that message out there? Is it as simple as getting the message out there that this is a requirement, and then we kind of back our way into the actual, decision later on? Any comments on that?
I mean, from my perspective, it is essential that we say something in this realm has to be baked into whatever the proposal is. And at some point, we're going to have a way in which we reconcile what we project versus what reality is, right? They've spent a lot of time talking about how they're invested in monitoring. Well, at what point do they recognize that their monitoring numbers have shown that city streets are so much more burdened than what their model was? How do you adjust for that? The other thing is the conversation around whose role. I think ODOT is gonna need direction from OTC, maybe even from the legislature. And we should be advocating for as much clarity and for as much at the local level as possible, because we all know when ODOT comes in to do local projects, they're more costly and they don't actually deliver all of our results. So if they can identify a project list that they'd like to see done, that they could have locals do, if it's attached to a bucket of money, even if it's going to take several years to get out the door, I think that would be something we could all advocate for.
Yeah,
Very good.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
You know, there is one thing I'll just frame it a little bit in the way I haven't framed it before, and that is, let's just say whether the lanes are built, the third lane's built or not. Let's just say that the number of the calculation for diversion is 35% of what would otherwise be freeway traffic. 35% is that diverted on local roads. If that's the case, let's just be mindful. That's a 35% reduction and ODOT maintenance liability, because they're not burdening the wear and tear. And that's a 35% transfer, a burden shift to the local jurisdictions for that wear and tear. So it's a win for ODOT doing nothing. So diversion does provide a maintenance benefit by diverting traffic on our local roads, but that's where that local revenue sharing is justified. But we don't have the raw numbers. Getting back to Councilor Sherman's point, you've heard us over and over try to establish and ask for what are the current diversion rates today, and then subsequent to tolling, that being in place, what will it be then, to help calculate what is a fair amount for revenue sharing based on, again, that wear and tear. And that's going to look different everywhere along the way. For every mile you go down I-5 or 205, that's going to look different on who bears that burden or who bears that benefit, ODOT being maybe the benefactor of that. How we calculate that needs a lot more modeling that I'm not sure we've got the right model to even calculate that at all. So I see Jamie, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Councilor Sherman's comments, questions, and say, I think that's what we're all trying to sort out right now. It's really a chicken or egg conversation, and it's been this way, right, the whole time. But I think one thing that we see very clearly is there is clear regional alignment on the fact that we need to have resources distributed to the local jurisdictions to deal with the impacts to the local system that we're anticipating. And so I have been talking with other partners. I think, getting clarity to Councilor Lewis's point from the OTC and getting them to direct ODOT staff to work to develop a revenue sharing agreement could be a really good next step. That would clarify this kind of finger pointing activity that's been going on of like, well, we don't have the authority to have this conversation. So if we can get some direction to ODOT staff to work perhaps with RTAC to develop a revenue sharing agreement, that could buy us the time to figure out exactly how to do it. And I just wanted to acknowledge the other thing Councilor Lewis said, which is, this eventually has to be trued up to data. We are guessing right now, right? Through the Nexus process, we're guessing, well, we think we might see impacts here, but eventually we will have more sophisticated tools to be able to understand that. And then eventually we'll actually be seeing some of those impacts. So I do wonder how the monitoring framework piece could be potentially helpful in this conversation for accountability, to make sure we're actually putting the resources toward where the impacts are. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I know many of your staff are working with us to think about these things right now, but a good next step is getting that clear direction to ODOT staff so that they know that they need to be working with the locals to develop this plan. Would be a big win for us at this stage in the process.
Thank you, Jamie. One thing I've been struggling with, and you touched on it as far as directing ODOT staff, and in recent conversations I've had with legislators, for that matter, not all of them, just some of them, that there's a question as to, does the OTC actually direct ODOT, or does the legislature direct ODOT? And if I hear more clearly than ever, I really hear the legislators particularly those on the Joint Transportation Commission saying, oh no, it's us. We own that. We direct the ODOT staff, not you or anyone else, whoever that may be. So that's not public, I can cite, but I've heard it through from reliable sources that there is a misunderstanding of what the OTC's role is. So any other comments, questions, folks? Mr. McCabe?
Okay, a couple, one big item that has been missed, well, it hasn't been missed, it got taken off, is that early on they were saying that the amount of tolling for the people that live in this region would be $461 a year. They didn't come out with how they got there, but essentially it was a 9% increase in transportation cost, and everybody in this area would be paying 315% more than anybody else pays in gasoline tax. And so when they came up with these new tolling, when you ask, well, how much is that per person? They go, we don't know. We're just going to let OTC pass it. And I'm like, we need to know those numbers because those are bad numbers when you're looking at a 315% increase over what everybody else pays for state gas tax and an increase of 9% on transportation costs. It needs to be addressed because I keep on going back. Let Clark County pay for this. And the other area that is really mind-boggling is when you ask, well, when people come from I-5 going north, will they stay on I-5 going north once they find out there's a toll on I-205? And they go, nope, everybody's going to keep going the same patterns. And I found out where George Washington crossed the Delaware because I didn't want to pay a toll. So this belief that nobody's going to divert from I-205 and continue on I-5 is essentially non-scientific, and it needs to be addressed.
Thank you, John. Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, I think with regards to the OTC role, the legislature relates to every state agency in a very similar way, and that is through budget and through policy, but not through operations. But the OTC has a very specific role with regard to operations in that they are between the director and the governor in a way that no other state agency has that same level of buffer from the executive branch. So yes, there are policies and yes, there are budgets, but when it comes to operation prioritization, that's where the OTC comes in. So I think that there are legislators who would like to have their policies so refined that there are no operational questions, but there will always be operational questions. So I think that's why when we have the conversation about OTC reform, it's important not to just think about representation and what their powers and duties are, but to think more about transparency and to think about making sure that they understand the metro region and get how they have to work, say with JPAC and the RTP, the fight to unbundle giant packets of money that we're going to go through the RTP, that was discretion that we weren't necessarily just giving to staff, but we were giving it to a statewide body as opposed to ourselves as a local body. So I get why you're having that conversation with the legislature, but it's also important to consider it just as a chain of command up to the executive branch.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are, interesting little maneuvers where in HB 2017, the highway fund had they had an allocation that was embedded in HB 2017 that now is where I almost say the OTC, but ODOT's realizing that we don't have enough money for maintenance. Well, that was legislatively directed in HB 2017. So until that time or a recommendation comes from either ODOT staff or the OTC to take another look at that, there's nuances to all of it. And I do remember former Chair Van Brockland say one time I forgot what the decision was, but the governor intervened on a matter several years ago, and Chair Van Brockland said, well, we work at the pleasure of the governor. So essentially, you know, that's the connection, and somewhat nuanced by Counselor Lewis. So no disagreement, but in a way to the public, it's clear as mud at the end of the day. All right. Any other conversation? Where are we on the agenda, Brian?
Well, I think because we moved the legislative update up to the top, we've gotten through our agenda. So the only other thing is space for updates and other business.
Okay. Any updates, other business? Great. Well, we'll end early. That's nothing wrong with that. I want to thank staff for all the hard work they've done, and thank you for joining us today. And you all be safe out there during the big thaw. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.